Well, it is a real honor to be here. I arrived in Texas about a fortnight ago, went to see my daddy. He's been a real pioneer for Jesus, missionary in India. I grew up there. But he's at that stage of life when his thinking is becoming more creative. He told me this wonderful story of David and Goliath, and he said, "Rachel, have you heard the story of David and Goliath?" I said, "No, Dad, I'm not sure I have. Tell me." He said, "Well, there were these 5 cities, and I began to research how to use Spitfire bombers, and we went in with the bombers, and we took out these 5 brothers of David, and we decimated it. And then we called a national day of prayer, and Churchill was there. And I thought, this is the most exciting David and Goliath story I've heard for a long time." Seasons of life. I think there's a PowerPoint and when that comes. And I just then came up here into the Northwest, which is most probably the place that I connect with the irritation, agitation of what God is doing maybe in Washington State, but also then for America. This is my spiritual home, although Texas is my more natural home. And as I really prayed, I said, "God, what do you want me to speak?" I was quite surprised because I'm carrying different words at this time. I really feel that God has said it's a Daniel season and it's a season to stand. And if you read Daniel 10 again and again, God comes to Daniel, "Now stand." You know, and Daniel was found, Daniel 10:4, standing by the Tigris. That's the river which was one of the boundaries of the Garden of Eden. And I wonder if he's standing there reflecting what should be happening in our nation. We're under all sorts of other empire spirits of the Babylonian culture, but we've got a word, and it's been a long time. 70 years is a lifetime, literally. But yet there's a shift coming to break some of the curses, to walk into a new season. So what do? I stand. And then the angel finally breaks through in Daniel 10 verse 13 and says, "We've just been seriously held up in the heavens." And if you go back to Daniel 10:12, it says, "From the first moment you opened your mouth, I heard, I responded." And so sometimes we have this understanding that actually it's God, that we're not praying right on earth, and we should be doing more to move earth to heaven. And God says this is not an earth to heaven moment. This is a heaven to earth moment. From the first moment you began to pray, shift stuff in your man prayer, in your church prayer, in the national prayer for America. From the first moment I heard, because this is a shifting season in America, I'm breaking some empire spirits that have held and contained the promises of God. There's a shift, 70 years, the chains are snapping, the chains are breaking, but there has been an unholy contest in the heavens above that even the angel Michael gets called in, remember? And I mean, you're talking the double 5-star general of heaven to come and assist against the prince of Persia. And he said, now, after 21 days, I've broken through. I wonder if you've ever taken time to think what that battle looked like. Go to Ephesians 6. You know, we do not fight against flesh and blood, but we do fight against principalities. What does that look like? 21 days in that season of Daniel, and all Daniel was told, stand, just keep standing, stand. I looked for a man, Ezekiel 22:30, who would stand in the gap. Which gap? Is it the gap between heaven and earth? Is it the gap between righteousness and unrighteousness? And I believe God's saying, come on, stand in some gaps, but ask me which one. It's a standing season. I haven't got time to preach all that I've been carrying prophetically. I said, shall I preach the whole of that? God said, no. I then went to Jake's house last Sunday, and I preached on the Omega and Alpha season, and how I believe God is shutting doors and opening doors, the transition. But when I asked him about this morning, he said, Rachel, and I've never preached this on a Sunday morning, so this is wrong. He said, I want you to preach about the twin tracks of life. I want you to preach about the twin tracks of life. Because what I want you to do with Sonrise is give them a perspective of how to navigate life in this next season, because it might feel a little bit different, but they need to realize, and with that background of what I've said of Daniel, God is not against you, he is for you, but life can sometimes be hard to interpret. You see, what has your life been these last months, this last year? What has made you smile? What has made you cry? You see, life gets conflicted. And so often our faith can be challenged, our mental health overwhelmed, our emotional state suppressed, because we can't understand. I love you, God, but. You see, I was in this situation just 2 weeks ago, where a precious boy called Matthew, 12 years old, after 18 months of prayer, died and went to be with Jesus. We had prayed. We had fasted. That precious boy, 6 months earlier, had led his very rebellious dad to the Lord, and we'd seen such a turnaround in the whole family. But he died and went to Jesus. On the same day, within half an hour, I get a text of a precious father called Jason, who had been a drug addict, gang leader, in the most terrible mess, who should have died on heroin, had an amazing encounter with God, and we've walked with him. He'd fallen in love with a beautiful girl called Trish. We had had the privilege of doing their marriage and counseling, and had just given birth to a baby girl called Mercy. And so you stand there. Life, twin tracks, sweet, sour, hope, despair, goodness, difficulty. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 said there is a time for everything. But I don't like time for everything. I want time for some things. There is a season for every activity under the heavens. There is a time to be born, yea. Time to die, no. Time to plant, yea. Time to uproot, leave it alone, God, please. Time to kill, yes, that one you can, but not this one. Time to heal. Time to tear down, time to build. Time to weep. Time to laugh, time to mourn, time to dance. You see, in the midst of life, we're in this constant tension of both and. But I felt that as I really prayed, and God gave me that title, talk to them about the twin tracks of life. I believe as the Sonrise has, God wants to put a grace upon you to be a prophetic people, to begin to teach a community, a culture, and even a nation how to navigate wisely the twin tracks of life. You see, so often, and even some of my background, was that we just go from glory to glory, and it's on this super express train, hoo-hoo, and it's all wonderful. And if something goes wrong, it's because I've done something bad. And God just said to me one day, Rachel, don't you realize that bad things happen to good people? Look at Jesus. And it's like, so how are we going to navigate life? How are we in this prophetic season of standing when there's rip-roaring battle, shifting of economies, shifting of empires, ways of thinking? I think some of the greatest cultural shifts we've seen are beginning to happen around us. How do we stand? How do we live in this tension without being overwhelmed and still recognize the good news when it feels bad? How do we genuinely weep with those who weep? And yeah, I used to think, okay, I've got some bad news. Now I can have my weeping time. This will last 3 months. And then, yay, breakthrough. Now I have my happy time and laugh with those who laugh. Can I just say that I believe God wants to increase the grace of the church so we have one foot that can walk the rail of difficulty, singing in the midst of darkness, hearing the chains break, with the other foot recognizing the goodness of God, even when my life is being stretched. It's not either or, it's both and. I have to learn to weep and rejoice in the same moment. You see, I was praying, and God just said this to me. He said, Rachel, I want to upgrade the navigation skills of the church. Think of that path. You will be able to find your way through difficult circumstances with new grace. I will show you the way when there seems to be no way. Often you have felt you have reached the dead end stop sign. But I still have a way for you. I will be both the lamp to your feet in your everyday, and I will reveal the broad path of your future. Do not fear, nor be anxious for anything. I want to gift to you new skills to navigate how to walk in these days as a church, and you will find your way through on the twin tracks of life. Come on. We've got to learn a new grace. And I think a lot of our conflict, a lot of our battle with God, a lot of that misunderstanding of trust and leaning in. I mean, the way we led the worship was absolutely perfect, but it's like I just want it to go finished, all stop, go on. But I believe God is saying, come on, time to grow up, church. It's both and. So how do we move? As I said, I've been preaching, and I just feel it is a season of Omega and Alpha. We all know Revelation chapter 1, verse 4, I am the God of Alpha and Omega. I am the God that is and was and is to come. But most of us, and I'm sure even in this house, especially if we're prophetic, we preach the God of Alpha. We preach the God who breaks open the way. We preach the God who opens the door. We preach the God who says, this is a new day. This is a new year. This is the new fruitfulness. There is harvest. This is the breakthrough. How many of you know what I'm talking? It's the Alpha. It's the A. But God says, I have both within my very nature, I am the God who is and was and is to come. The is of God is both Alpha and Omega. He is both the God who opens and shuts. He is both the God who gives breakthrough and gives resistance. He is both the God who gives harvest and cuts back and prunes and takes it away. He is both the God who gives you birthing, who gives you that birthing season, and he's the God who kills it dead, stops it, and suddenly you think, but God, that money was just coming into the business. I don't understand. We were flourishing, we were doing so well, and suddenly overnight, bang, the door's shut. I wonder if you've ever heard a sermon on the God of Omega. How do we navigate those twin tracks of life when suddenly we wake up one morning, it's finished. We go into our workplace and the redundancy's there. Omega. Is it finished? How do we handle it? And God's really been speaking that in this season, he wants to upgrade the church, that we become like our daddy in heaven, that we are the passionate, prophetic, praying people who understand the God of Alpha. But I believe the true prophetic people are the people who can navigate the Omega of God, who shuts things down, says this season is finished, it is done, and then can navigate the path through the wilderness. Isaiah 43, come on. It is finished. Don't dwell on the past. I've shut that door. Stop looking back. I am giving you new things. Can't you perceive it? Can't you see it? You need to change your focus because this is a shut door time. Stop being sentimental. Stop going back to try and open it. Well, if I'm nice to them, maybe they'll come and be my friends still. If it's good, maybe we'll still get along. But in your spirit, it's shut. Isaiah 22:22. I will put the key on your shoulder. I will place on your shoulder the key of the house of David. What he opens, Alpha. No one can shut. I love that God. I love it when God says, I'm going to open, open, open. And it doesn't care what people think about you. It's open to you. Yay, God, I love that. I don't like it so much when God says, hard luck, Rachel, I've shut it. You can pray. You can talk. You can reason. It's done. And I believe we're in that season of transition when God is just going, bang! Twin tracks. How many of you know what I'm talking about? How do it make sense? And I just want to say, we are living in a prophetic season of huge transition, and it's not bad. It's amazing. But there has to be an omega to have an alpha. I have to shut some things down. How many of you are already living at 110% capacity? Time-wise, financial-wise. You see, something has to go to make room for the new. God said to me, this is a season to declutter. This is a season to declutter. And the problem is we often don't recognize. We have our processes. We have our preferences. But we've always done it like that. Hard luck, grow up, get over it, let it go. Now, you might think this is just a preach for the grannies. Yes, I'm 58. I'm a mother of 2, a granny of 5. But I live in Oxford. And we just did an assessment of our church average age. It's 29 years, 8 months. And I began to realize that actually the youth, and as I spend time with them, they're more sentimental than I am. It's like, no, you need to move. That needs to stop. This needs to change. I don't care what age you are. I believe that the Holy Spirit is speaking to us. That this is a season where we need to take hold of what lies ahead. And so we've got to let go of some of the clutter in our lives. The clutter of our thinking. The clutter of our emotions. The clutter in our finances. The clutter in our just daily commitments. We've got to trim back. You see, the pruning of God is never a negativity. It's a compliment. It means that you have been fruitful. It means that you have produced harvest. So if God is cutting stuff back and stopping, it's not because he's mad at you. It's because he's glad with you. And he's saying, I am pruning you to position you for the next season. It's a compliment. Come on. So God says this is reset and recalibrate season. Reset, recalibrate. There have been many conferences. It's really interesting. Both Helen and I had these words. And then I think IHOP had reset. All over the world, I've just noticed reset. Now, I'm being a bit picky, but I'm a scientist in background. And so I don't really like the reset button. I like the recalibrate button. You see, why don't I like the reset? Because when I hit that reset button, it gives me options. It says, do you want to reset back to the last backup, to a year ago? You can choose the plumb line, the standard to which you realign. And you see, in our culture today, we want the choice. Well, I want to choose what I do with my money, where I reset my time, where I reset my disciplines, where I reset. And so we want to reset against each other. Well, actually, Rachel, I think I'm doing pretty good. When I look at Helen, when I look at Terry, when I look at Pastor Dan, when I look at them, they're doing this and this, but I'm doing this, so I must be okay. No insult, man, so you get what I'm saying. But we all do this, contrast, compare. And you see, we reset against false standards. And we give ourselves a false assessment and order. But God's saying, no, don't just reset, recalibrate. You see, recalibration, the word to recalibrate, means to come back and measure against the original standard. It's the plumb line. And he's saying, come on, what have I called you to do? with your money, with your marriage, with your business, with your day, with your attitude. Come on, what are you called? And declutter. Get rid of the stuff that is actually taking you away from the main thing. That's part of pruning. How does God prune? Usually he has to get our attention by touching our money. If he touches your money, you wake up and you suddenly think, okay, God. How many of you know? Maybe your kids and some relationships. Maybe your health. Those are three things. If God touches your money, your relationship, or your health, usually you suddenly go, oh, what's going on? And it forces you to come back to that calibration. God, actually, what do I need to give myself to? So God is not being mean with you. He's being kind with you, because I believe actually, and I walked in here and I said to Helen, this house, Sonrise, carries authority. I've been ministering all sorts of churches all over, and there are certain houses I go into and I think, oh, I feel like home. In the sense that I've got a governmental mantle over me. I haven't got to create it for myself. Obviously, there's a government God gives to you under your own anointing. But it's so wonderful. You just walk into a big space. You feel the government of worship and of leadership. And you can just present a word knowing there's governance and foundation underneath it. Amen. This house has that. And you're privileged. You mostly don't realize you have it until you don't. And that's why with greater gifting is greater responsibility. And I believe also this house, Sonrise, God is resetting, recalibrating you to be a voice and an influence for Washington State and the U.S. I believe that, God spoke to me. 2019 is a year of preparation to recalibrate for a decade. 2020s are going to be a mark-out decade. God woke me up and he said, the 2020s are going to be a mark-out decade of extraordinary evangelism and miracles. And I said, what do you mean by a mark-out decade? He said, as the 1960s was the decade of the 20th century, so the 2020s will be the landmark decade of the 21st century. It is going to be a time when it's so important to set culture, to set communication in the house, and that God will set his church up to be a voice if you're ready to be upgraded. It's a season. So you see, 2019 for me as a year, as a prophet, has been different. We had 2007, A Touch from Heaven. We had all these cute little dittos for so many years. There's been nothing for certainly not that I have seen in Britain, Europe, and I keep an eye, obviously, on the American Prophet's table. But there's been no cute dittos. 2019 will be da-da-da-da. It's 2019, it's going to be hard work. 2019 is sort your life out. 2019 is get prepared. 2019 is declutter, reset, sort it out, shut the door. Isaiah 43, you see, it says, now forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I do a new thing. It's springing up. And then it goes on. Where does it spring up? In the wilderness. And there will be streams in the wasteland. I want to say that journey of life from Omega to Alpha is usually in an uncertain, uncharted place. That's why you're a prophetic house with a governmental authority. And I believe, John, God's going to use you as a compass point to reset, realign, even as part of the voice of what needs to happen for the next generation. It's a whole new shift of shutting doors, opening doors, and there's a new communication skill of culture and heart that needs to come from Washington State for the sake of America. But it's not going to look pretty, and it doesn't necessarily mean it will feel nice. It's twin tracks. So how do we navigate it? Number one, we become utterly determined to live life trusting. I believe that you are going to be given loads of opportunities to get offended with God and get offended with people. That God's not going to make sense. You prayed for change, you fasted, you pushed through. Nothing changes, or it's even got worse. You believed for healing. You had a scripture. You thought it was all there, but they died. You asked for a child. And your friend gets pregnant again and didn't want it, and you're still not pregnant. Your job situation is utterly stagnant. Your finances are pressed, and you've given faithfully to God, but it seems that God's doesn't work for you. How, in those twin tracks of life, how many of you say, I relate to some of that, but I just didn't know I could quite say it like that. But let's face the fact, that is the twin tracks of life. How, in that, what do? We become like Job, who said, yet though you slay me, I will, come on, say it with lots of coffee, I will trust you. I will trust you. I will trust you. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And I believe in these twin tracks of life, God is giving us lots of opportunity to put our foot on a rail that does not make sense, but yet we cannot say it is nonsense. God, I will trust you. And in the midst of it, there is always the blessing. I remember I went through a time when Gordon was horrendously betrayed. And Gordon is the sweetest man. He never really creates enemies. He's loved by everyone, but someone just took a target on him. And they were mean, cruel. And I watched it. I watched how Gordon navigated. I said, come on, Gordon, you could do something. If you did this and this, we could set this up. And, you know, the strategist, and Gordon's just like, sweetie, let it be. We just walked through. Let it be. It was horrible. And in that moment, virtually when one of the worst scenarios of all the complications of this was kicking off, my son David walks in. And he said, I know that Jenny's the girl for me to marry. Will you plan our wedding? And here I am watching my husband going through one of the most grim, brutal, frontal assaults on his character thing. And my son is in the happiest I've ever seen him. And he has married a most outstanding girl. Sweet Sarah. And I knew God said to me, Rachel, don't you dare diminish David's day because of your resentment to Gordon's battle. So how do we walk those twin tracks of life? We become determined. I don't get it, but I will trust you. Come on, I want you to look at some of those positions, those faces, those injustices, and say, God, I don't get it, but I will trust you. Number 2, how do we walk these twin tracks? We keep our faith and courage. I love this verse in 2 Samuel 7:27. Oh, Lord God, God of Israel, you have revealed this to your servant, saying, I've built a house for you. And if you remember the journey of this, it wasn't easy. And David then says, so now I have found courage to offer you this prayer. And what does he pray? Sovereign Lord, you are God. Your words are trustworthy. It takes courage to sometimes pray that prayer. God, you are trustworthy. He said, I have found courage to pray this prayer. God, you are trustworthy, and you have promised good things to your servant. Okay, I can't build the house. Solomon's going to do it. I'm a bit confused by that, but God, I've come back to a place of emotional and spiritual courage that can say, you're trustworthy. There's some of you that begin to not pray around situations. You need to pray through situations. You know, sometimes we treat our life a little bit like fish and bones. We just we begin eating the fish, we find a bone and we spit it all out and say, I'm never eating fish again. No, the mature way is get the bone out and keep eating the fish. Don't spit God out because you found a bone in your mouth. Something that you didn't like that caught in the back of your throat. It takes courage. Hebrews 10:35 said, do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to take hold of that courage on these twin tracks of life and keep doing what is right. Don't give up. Even when these circumstances are not making sense, God is not mad at you. He's with you. Number 3. Remember, God has not changed, just your life has. God has not changed, just your life has. You see, when we hit those really rough circumstances that don't make sense, it's very easy to then reconfigure God through our circumstances. That's normal. We do that with nearly every relationship. If you're nice to me, I find it easy to be nice to you. If you start being mean to me, I'd quite like to be mean back. But since I'm not allowed to be mean back, at least I'll give you some distance. We withdraw. You see, you cannot let your circumstances change your view of God. Right. Remember, Hebrews 13. Come on. Jesus Christ is the yesterday and come on. We've got to learn how to navigate. This is a standing season. And God is saying it's time to grow up, church. I'm going to teach you. Life is not a monorail. It is a twin track. And because you're walking a twin track does not mean you've got it wrong. It actually means God has said you are mature. I'm going to show you that at the end. I'll tell you a little story about this. God has not changed. Just your life has. 15 years ago, I had some good friends, Lizzie and Chris. They were youth pastors in a city just near where I lived. And Chris had a real heart for Kenya. And he had gone on a missions trip, and they'd seen extraordinary breakthrough right in the Nakuru, Navasha. They'd preached in all the schools and stuff. They were on their way back to the airport, and the matatu, the bus that they were in, fell down a ditch. 18 people on this bus, only one was killed, and that was dear Chris. I happened to be in the church that weekend. So I turned up on the Saturday with the news just having arrived on the Thursday that dear Chris had been killed in this tragic accident. Lizzie was there at home with her 3 kids, and she had a middle son who was called Daniel, who was 7 years old. And so he knows me quite well, and I was sitting down, and I said to Daniel, I said, come sit with Auntie Rachel. I said, Daniel, what do you think about your daddy being in heaven? He said, I've got a question for you, Auntie Rachel. Does Jesus share? So I said, why? What do you mean, Daniel? He said, well, Jesus can have Daddy living in his house for a little time, but then I'd like him to share and let him come and live back in my house. So if he can live in my house for a while and then live in his house for a while, that's fine. I don't mind sharing. So I had to say to Daniel, Daniel, I'm sorry, I don't think Jesus will share like that. He puts his hands on his head. He said, I don't think Jesus is very kind. In Sunday school, they say, if you're kind, you will share. So Jesus is not kind. And maybe we don't quite feel the permission to say that, but we feel it. How many times have you felt, Jesus, I don't think you're being very kind right now? The interesting thing is I carried on praying with little Daniel. He ran out, came back in, and he came in with a CD by Godfrey Birtle. And he stood in the middle of his lounge, and I'm going to go teach. And I had wanted to be with the family to get a permission and an understanding of how to navigate, how to preach, and what to do for the church and the house. And I wanted to be appropriate for the family and Lizzie. He stood in the middle and he said, but Auntie Rachel, I know God isn't always nice. And he's not being very kind right now, but even if he takes my daddy, he is still God. And I remember, even today, I can remember that little stance. The profoundness of a 7-year-old challenging all the conflictedness that I felt in that moment. So he said, Auntie Rachel, you should go to the church and you should tell them, remember, even though he's taken my daddy, he's still God, and let him be God. That young man, Daniel, is now a youth pastor doing incredible stuff. He navigated his way through, and every time I see him, he always slaps me back and says, still God. And I said, Daniel, don't make me cry. Remember, your life may have changed, but God hasn't. Can you say that? I want you to look at circumstances that are really on those twin tracks, have made you feel, where is he? I want you to look and say, God, teach me the language. 1, 2, 3. You are still God. Come on, look at it again. Father, help me. You are still God. Father, you are still God. Number 4. Remember, the end is not the end until it is the end. The Omega. There's doors that just go boom and we think it's finished. Jesus hung on the cross in John 17. We took communion. It is finished. But then he went into the grave. And that Omega season coming back to an alpha, that was messy in a grave. I wonder what the hell against him was like for those 3 days. As Jesus transitioned from Omega to the Alpha of resurrection. You see, when we move from that Omega, shut, don't understand it, it's finished, it's the end. There is always that way in the wilderness, streams in the desert, the grave. And Jesus was in a grave 3 days. We don't know much about it. But all of hell would have wanted to keep him there. And these Omega seasons are not as we metamorphose back into the new Alpha, that chrysalis time, that transformational time. Do you get what I'm doing here? It's never nice, but it is life. And I believe God, literally, he woke me up and he said, you'd speak on the twin tracks. I've never really done it. I processed it because you have to as a minister for your own integrity. But come on, God is saying there is a way through these Omega seasons to find the God of Alpha. There's a way to recover from the pruning, to find the new flourishing. There's a way to recover from the death and the loss and betrayal of deep friendships and pain. Marriages that get broken. People that die. And it is a bit difficult, but the end is not the end until God finally says it is the end. Isaiah 46:10. I have made known the end from the beginning. From the ancient times is still to come. And I say to you, and I felt this so strongly as I prepared it, that God would literally speak into you face to face. My purpose will stand. I have the last word. I do what I please, what is my pleasure, my purpose, my decree, my signature on your life, on your family line, on your business. What I shut, no man can open, but what I open, no man can shut. Do not be alarmed. Do not be afraid, little flock. It is your Father's pleasure to give you every key to every situation. He will give you the keys of the kingdom. So how do we live on these twin tracks? We become determined to trust. We keep our courage. We don't let shift the face of God. We remember that when the devil screams at a dead end, remember, it's a dead end, it's a stop sign, nowhere through. God gave me that word for you. There are new navigation skills for you on this twin tracks of life. There is a new grace to come upon you to get through what seems the impossibility. Number 5, how do we do it? Ask the intelligent question. You see, when we're on those twin tracks of life, we start asking questions. Some questions are real helpful. Some questions are real dumb and unhelpful. Some questions get you in a hole. Some questions get you seeing heaven. And I remember I learned pretty early on as a minister, I'm not intelligent enough to ask the question why when life doesn't make sense. It gets me in a hole. There are times, do not ask why. Ask the more intelligent question. God, what is this for? You see, John, the Gospel of John, chapter 9. Jesus is walking with his disciples. And as they're walking along, they see a man blind from birth. And his disciples say, Rabbi, why is this man blind? Is it because this man sinned, or is it his parents were, having an affair? And they want the scandal. What's the backstory of why this man is in a mess? And Jesus says, neither. Wrong question. He said, no, this man's life is in this position right now because it gives an opportunity for the works of God to be revealed. And you might think, well, God, why did this happen? God says, don't go on the history. Right now, there's an opportunity here. Come on, keep trusting. Be courageous. Keep your face of God. The end's not the end. Can you see an opportunity or can you see a disaster on those twin tracks? But God, it can't be anything good coming out of here. And look at that little Chris. Little Daniel, Chris's son. I mean, I must admit, the mummy heart in me thought, I wonder if he'll navigate it through. He has. He's still on fire for Jesus. A worship leader like his dad. A lover of the presence. Ask the right questions. And finally, number 6, how do we do it? Remember, God is good all the time. Remember, God is good all the time. But there seriously are times when it does not feel like it. My husband Gordon says this, God is good, but it doesn't always feel nice. So don't get offended with God. I believe that for you personally, many of you are walking out this conflicted season. Many of you are on these twin tracks. Many of you are in that place of thinking, God, but I've been dedicated. What have I done wrong, etc. I have come to literally break that off for you today. But I believe that God is going to navigate in this house a whole level of understanding and articulation and communication. Because I believe that the days that are coming ahead, as we make a shift from much of the season we have been in into the new season of the 2020s, we're going to have to navigate this omega to a new alpha, and it's going to be a bit messy. We're going to have times of ecstatic joy, like dear Jason and Trish. I mean, he was such a heroin addict. He had ruined every bit of his biochemistry. He should be dead. And here he is, totally born again, transformed, right in Birmingham there, turning around drug addicts, married to Trish, who's an outstanding, pure, beautiful girl. They've just given birth to a baby girl called Mercy. I mean, honestly, I wept. And then there's dear Matthew gone to be with Jesus. I think, God, don't do this to me. But I believe we're going to have to mature and be able to cope. James chapter 1, consider it pure joy, my brothers, sisters, friends, Sonrise Church. Because whenever you face these twin tracks of life, in all sorts of kinds and guises, just know that this is testing, maturing your faith. And it develops a new tenacity, perseverance. And this tenacity, intentional perseverance, actually helps you finish the God-decreed work, assignment that you have. And it helps you finish and complete that assignment with a new level of maturity and finality so that you actually won't lack anything, body, soul, mind, spirit, being, and you will get the job done. So why the twin tracks? Because God trusts you. When life doesn't make sense, it's actually about maturity. He's saying, time to grow up. Come on, church in America, time to grow up. There's a shift coming, 70 years. In the 1940s, I was thinking about the West Coast, and God just said the 1940s were actually the last decade when signs, wonders, miracles, etc. were very commonplace all up and down the West Coast. And actually began closing down. You had John G. Lake, you had Amy McPherson, you had all that stuff, 30s and 40s. There was a breath. That was 70 years ago. And then 50s and 60s came, and it was like a capstone, a captivity came. Empire spirits began to shut stuff down. The political spirit, the media, education, all sorts of stuff has just sat. But we're coming to the end of a 70-year decree. There's a shift. Something's going to break. Something's going to bust open. But it's not just going to be for, goosebump on my goosebump. I believe there's a stature and a standing like Daniel. Will you stand? Will you stand? Will I weep? Will I laugh? Will I let it be shut? Will I let it be open? Will I learn to navigate that stance on the twin tracks of life rather than a very simplistic monorail that just said, God is good all the time. Choo-choo, up to heaven, choo-choo, choo-choo. How many have learned life isn't quite that simple? Will you stand with me? Has that helped you? Has that given you some context? How many would say, I'm walking those twin tracks at the moment? I want you to put your hands up. I want you to put your left hand up first and make that your hand of challenge. Your hand where you felt, God, I found this hard. This is the hand that I found it difficult to trust, that I need courage. It's been my negative a little bit. Put that to heaven and say, God, today I want you to see my hand and I trust you. Just begin to tell him you trust him. And then I want you to lift the other hand and say, but this is the God. God, don't let me lose the blessing. Because you see, so often when we are overwhelmed with stuff being stripped away, being taken, we get the birth of a baby girl called Mercy. And it would be so easy for me just to concentrate on the loss of Matthew. I prayed for Mercy as many years, more years than I prayed. Come on, take hold. And your daddy in heaven loves you. Oh, your daddy in heaven loves you. Actually, all the pruning, the shutting of doors, the downsizing, the shifting is not because he's mad at you. It's because he compliments you and upgrades you for a new season of fruitfulness. And he's asking you, will you let go? For some of you, as I've spoken, you've just realized, oh God, I'm so sorry. I've been so mad at you, and I need to let you back in my world again. I've pushed you out because I've seen you as my problem. But God, I want to say today, I trust you. If that's you, as we just close this service, I wonder if you could just come forward. The reason I'm asking you to do that is not so much I can do anything for you, but it's that walk of faith that says, God, I got stuck in the wrong place, and I am welcoming you back in a whole new level of trust. If there's a prayer team here, do come and join me. But if you're here and you just know, I've had a moment today and I've realized I've been so angry and offended with God. But you heard that little cry of Daniel that just said, he's still God. If you need to come forward, then you come. Wherever you are, just come. But I want to pray for the rest of you. Put those hands up. Father, I pray for an incredible anointing upon this house of Sonrise to live the twin tracks of life. I pray that you will put a revelation on us. I pray that you will take this word and you will continue speaking it to us, enlightening it to us. I pray that every single place where the devil has sidetracked us, deceived us, right now we just take authority. We say, no. God, I trust you. God, I believe in you. God, I love you. And I thank you for it in Jesus' name. Just say this with me today. Father, I ask that you would teach me to walk the twin tracks of life. Teach me to weep. Teach me to laugh. But teach me to behold God. Whatever is happening.